Hey, it's your old pal Lucid Stew again with the first official episode of From Project Spark to C++. In this video, I will show you how to set up an IDE if you would like to follow along with the C++ coding, and we will also cover basic language concepts. I'm going to use Visual Studio 2017 for the C++ examples in this series. This is the easiest IDE to get a hold of and set up. If you have another IDE or would like to use a different one to follow along, feel free. If you don't know what an IDE is, follow the link in the card. In order to get Visual Studio, go to the URL above. Make sure you get the Visual Studio Community Edition, which is free to download and use. After you download Visual Studio and are setting up your workloads, make sure you check the box for desktop development with C++. If you have any problems with installing and setting up Visual Studio for this project, check out the link in the card. If you still have problems, feel free to ask in the comments, but I should warn you, I'm definitely not a Visual Studio expert, so help will probably be fairly limited on my part. Once you're in Visual Studio, you'll want to set up a new project. You can do this by going to File up top, pull the menu down to New, and then over to Project. In the new window on the left side under Templates, make sure you have selected Visual C++ and below that Win32. In the main part of the window, select Win32 console application. You'll likely never use the console for a game, but this is the simplest way of presenting examples. At the bottom, give your new project name and then click OK. In the new window that pops up, click Application Setting on the left and then check the box for Empty Project, which will allow us to start with a completely blank canvas. Then click Finish to create the new project. At this point, a lot of new things have popped up. We won't worry about that. Instead, go over to the right-hand side to a folder named Source Files. Right-click it and select Add, and over to New Item. When the new window comes up, make sure you have Visual C++ selected on the left. In the main part of the window, select C++ file and then rename it at the bottom. We're going to name it main because it's our main file. Once that's done, click the Add button on the lower right. You're in. Save the project and we'll actually use it in the next video. On to some language basics. Learning a programming language is a lot like learning a spoken language because both share the same basic characteristics. Both are made up of components that must come together in a certain way to be understood. The way those components come together is the language's syntax. For a spoken language, we use nouns, verbs, adjectives, and other components. Programming languages use values, keywords, and operators. Both use punctuation to relate the flow of an idea or when an idea is finished. I've used a pretty simple idea as an example, on the bottom left in English and on the bottom right in C++. The same idea in other programming languages can be very similar. You'll also see as we go that the same idea expressed in Project Spark is very familiar. This is because the syntax in Project Spark is a middle ground between the two. In our example here, both ideas mean the same thing. Spoken language and programming languages do differ, of course, and they do so for a reason. A spoken language must be understood by the speaker and the listener. The same can be said for a programming language. But a programming language must also be understood by the program that compiles the code into another language that the machine understands. That said, an important concept in programming is that the code should not only be understood by the machine, but that people reading it who are not necessarily the author should also be able to understand it. In the next few videos, I will be covering the components that make up a programming language in an effort to know how they come together so that both man and machine understand them. We'll start with values.